What's up, everybody? We're about to do a Bible study today, and we're going to have a little bit of fun. I decided we're going to hop in here and we're going to look at some dinosaurs, or what the Bible used to call them, dragons. And I'm going to show you some scriptures talking about two of some pretty rough ones you wouldn't really want to mess with. But the Bible confirms that there were these giant reptiles that roamed the earth, and they did more than that. So join me today, and let's jump in here and let's look at some of these dragons. We're going to find these creatures in the book of Job. We're going to be looking at Job 15, chapter 40, verse 15 through 24. And the first one we're going to look at is known as the Behemoth. And this is God talking to Job. You know, Job's going through a whole lot of, he's going through the trial that Satan's really putting him through. And he's trying not to question God, but he wants to question God. And this is when God's really telling him, look, God's saying, I'm the big dog here. Look at the things I've created. And he shows us two amazing creatures in here. Verse 15 says, "Look now at the behemoth which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. See now, his strength is in his hips, and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze, his ribs like bars of iron. He is the first of the ways of God. Only he who made him can bring near his sword. Surely the mountains yield food for him, and all the beasts of the field play there. He lies under the lotus trees in the covert of reeds and marsh. The lotus trees cover him with their shade. The willows by the brook surround him. Indeed, the river may rage, yet he is not disturbed. He is confident, though the Jordan gushes into his mouth, though he takes it in his eye, or one pierces his nose with a snare." So you see that this creature, he's just kind of chilling. He's chilling in the Jordan, in the marshes. Even though the water's gushing in his face, it ain't even fazing him. If somebody tries to catch him with a snare, he just shakes it off. It doesn't bother him at all. But we see some neat stuff here. Let me go back to it here. First, he eats grass. He's a vegetarian. He's not a meat eater. But we see he has strength in his hips. His power is in his stomach muscles. He's got abs, I guess you could say. He's real strong. But then it says he moves his tail like a cedar. Now, that's talking about a cedar tree. His tail sways back and forth like a cedar tree. There's some people who say this thing was a hippopotamus or even a donkey. They call it an ox, but it says he's kind of like an ox. He eats grass like an ox. But he's not. This is more than likely talking about, I think there's some dinosaurs called a sauropod, and that's the long-necked dinosaurs, the Brachiosaurus. More than likely, this is what this is talking about. We see his bones are like beams of bronze. He's so stout and strong. His ribs are like bars of iron. Nobody's messing with this thing. And again, he's just chilling in the river. You see in 19, again, he's the first of the ways of God, and that's talking about he's first in rank, or he's the chief of the animals, is what that's saying there. And it says only God who made him can bring near his sword. What it's saying there is only God has dominion over this thing. No human was going to take down one of these dinosaurs. Only God could do it. And then we see he just kind of chilling in the water. So that's one example of a dinosaur found within the Bible. And again, more than likely, that's a long-necked dinosaur. But I'm going to tell you something. Job 41 is the one that amazes me. I've always loved dinosaurs. I get asked at school all the time, well, what about the dinosaurs? What about this? And I explained to them, well, they used to be called dragons. The term dinosaur is actually a very new term. It was only created in like the 1800s, but all throughout history, you have tales of dragons. Yes, I'm talking about fire-breathing dragons, and it's in Chinese stories and Japanese stories and Indian stories. It's in all sorts of stories that talk about these creatures. And we're going to see one here in Job 41 that is actually being used all throughout mythology, and they still make movies about this thing today. So Job 41, we're going to look at the Leviathan. And God's asking Job, can you draw out Leviathan with a hook, or snare his tongue with a line which you lower? Can you put a reed through his nose, or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many supplications to you? Will he what does it say there? Well, he speaks softly to you is what he's asking. He's bringing up to Job. What about old Leviathan? Can you catch him? Can you do anything with him? Can you pierce him? Is he going to speak softly to you? What he's saying, the Leviathan's not something you're going to make a pet out of. Says, will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him as a servant forever? Will you play with him as with a bird, or will you leash him for your maidens? Again, he's saying again, can you make a pact with this animal? Is he going to buddy up with you? Will he be your servant? Or you going to make him plow your field, you know? Said, can you play with him like a bird? Can you have that? Or leash him for your maidens? Are you going to chain him up to show you ladies, say, hey, look what I've done? And you know, all throughout history, you see that. You see these knights in shining armor taking down these dragons for the maidens. All of that's coming straight out of the Bible. And again, Job's one of the oldest stories found there, and it's still being copied to this day. Verse 6, will your companions make a banquet of him? Will they apportion him among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons, or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hand on him, remember the battle, never do it again. I really like that. He says, can you make a banquet of him? Can you catch him and eat him? Are you going to feed him to everybody? You know, like having a big fish fry. It says, are the merchants going to chop him up and sell him to other people? And then it says, can you fill his skin with harpoons, or his head with fishing spears? And I love 8. It says, you lay your hands on him, you will remember the battle, and you'll never do it again. This is how bad this dude was. You was not going to mess with the Leviathan. He says in verse 9, indeed, any hope of overcoming him is false. Shall one not be overwhelmed at the sight of him? No one is so fierce that he would dare stir him up. Who then is able to stand against me? There's no hope in overcoming him. You will be overwhelmed just looking at him. And I love 10. No one is so fierce that he would dare stir him up. What he's saying, he said, they ain't a one of you humans bad enough to touch this thing I have created. No one can stand against the Leviathan. He says, who has preceded me that I should pay him? Everything under heaven is mine. I will not conceal his limbs, his mighty power, or his graceful proportions. So God's asking Job, the whole point of this, and if we saw dinosaurs, dragons, whatever you want to call them today, it would be amazing. There's amazing creatures today, but they all point to God. God is the only one that created these things and can handle these things. And that's what he's telling Job here. He says, I'm not going to conceal him. Everything under heaven is mine. I own him. Just like I own you, Job, just like he owns all of us. He loves us, and he's taking care of us. And even when we're going through hard times, just like Job was going through a hard time, he's been tested by Satan. A lot of horrible things happened to Job. But God was with him the whole time, and in the end, he is blessed. He is blessed way more than he could possibly imagine. And we got to remember that God owns us, but he loves us, and he's for us. And even though Satan is kind of owns planet Earth right now, he sent Jesus to take it back, and that's going to happen one day. But whatever we go through, we need to remember that God is in charge, and all of creation is pointing to that. Everything we see points to him, whether it's a puppy dog or it's the trees outside, is pointing to he has given it life. He's created it just like he's created us. So these amazing creatures we're reading about here, they're pointing to him. But let's keep going. This thing's finna blow your mind, or did mine. Verse 13, who can remove his outer coat? Who can approach him with a double bridle? Who can open the door of his face with his terrible teeth all around? So he's saying, who's going to remove his outer coat? Who's going to skin the Leviathan? Who's going to have a Leviathan coat? Going to have a dragon mail put on them? Said, who can do it? Who can approach him with a double bridle? Who can put a bridle in his mouth? You know, who can ride him? Then it says, who can even get close to his face because of the terrible teeth God has given this creature? His rows of scales are his pride, shut up tightly as with a seal. One is so near another that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another, they stick together and cannot be parted. We've been watching The Hobbit. I think of that dragon Smog, and that guy, he's shooting them arrows at Smog, and they're just hitting him and just bouncing off. Of course, in that movie, one of the scales he hits a scale and it gets knocked out. Excuse me there. And then the next time they fire, they shoot in that same spot, and it actually penetrates into his flesh. But God, they get this again. It all comes from what God has created. But they're showing, he's showing this Leviathan, hey, his scales are so packed you can't get to his flesh. You cannot hurt him. He's fully protected. And now here's the cool stuff, verse 18. His sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lights, sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke goes out of his nostrils as from a boiling pot, and burning, what does it say? Rushes. All right, I had to get out of the way, sorry. So we see the Leviathan is a fire-breathing serpent. He is a dragon. When he sneezes, light flashes from him. His eyelids, says his eyelids are like morning. You can see the fire behind his eyes. Again, I think of The Hobbit. You ought to watch it. You see Smog, and he's fixing to blow that smoke, and he gets hot inside, and you can see it. You can see the smoke coming out. But this thing really did that. Sparks of fire shoot out of his mouth. Smoke is coming out of his nostrils. Straight up in the scriptures, we are seeing a fire-breathing dragon. Again, these dinosaurs, many dinosaurs, again, they were dragons. That's just a giant lizard. People say, well, dragons flew. Well, guess what? There were dinosaurs who flew. A pterodactyl could fly. They say, well, dragons could breathe fire. Well, hey, there's dragons spitting acid out of their mouth. And then, of course, they are some that breathe fire. They just, they haven't brought that out. But God created these creatures. He keeps going with this Leviathan. His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes out of his mouth. Strength dwells in his neck, and sorrow dances before him. The folds of his flesh are joined together. They are firm on him and cannot be moved. All right, 21, his breath kindles coals, and a flame goes out of his mouth. Again, he's a fire-breathing dragon. He says he's got strength in his neck. Sorrow dances before him. What that is saying, anything that gets in his way, it's going to wish it didn't. It's going to be sorry when it's over, because this dude's fixing to smoke it. Then you see its flesh. Folds of his flesh are joined together. They're firm on him. That it can't be moved. His heart is as hard as stone, even as hard as the lower millstone. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. Because of his crashings, they are beside themselves. So showing again, when he rises up, everybody's afraid of him. They're running from him. Says, though the sword reaches him, it cannot avail, nor does spear, dart, or javelin. He regards iron as straw, and bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Sling stones become like stubble to him. So you're seeing no weapon can hurt him. Said spears, darts, javelin, the sword can't even reach him. Arrows just pop off of him. Sling stones are stubble, just little bitty things just falling on him. Darts are regarded as straw. He laughs at the threats of javelins. His undersides are like sharp potsherds. He spreads pointing marks in the mire. So at this bottom, it's like pots. If you've ever seen a pot that's been broken, it's hard. You can't get through it, is what that's talking about. He's laughing at javelins, and darts are like straw. There's nothing hurting him. He makes the deep boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment. He leaves a shining wake behind him. One would think the deep had white hair. Now, this was a water creature. And it says the deep would be boiling. He made a boiling pot. It got so hot where he was. He's leaving a wake behind him that's just like white. It says it looked like long white hair. I've seen Japanese and Chinese movies where they'd have some type of sea serpent swimming in the water, and you would see something like that. Says, on earth there is nothing like him which is made without fear. He beholds every high thing. He is king over all the children of pride. And that's showing anybody. Today we go out, we want to kill the biggest buck or get the biggest animal because we're prideful. Look what I got. I got that 15-pointer or whatever. And he's saying right here, the Leviathan's the king over all the children of pride. Whoever thinks I'm going to take his head, or heads, which we're fixing to see here in just a minute, they're in trouble. He's the king, and they're not going to overcome him. So now what happened to these dinosaurs? What happened to the Leviathan? Well, a lot of them God killed. He got rid of them, which we're fixing to see here in a minute. And then the flood, when the flood came, I'm sure that Noah probably brought dinosaurs onto the ark. He'd have brought babies, little ones, a boy and a girl, the little bitty ones. But the atmosphere would have changed. They were huge creatures, little bitty nostrils, and the air had to be perfect. And we know the air changed after the flood. You had water coming from above and below. So everything changed at the flood. And then a lot of folks killed them off. The ones that didn't get too big, we killed them. I have a history book. It talks about Alexander the Great had 2 pet dragons in his dungeon. He had them. But a lot of these more deadly ones, God took out. And we see that if you jump to Psalms. Psalm 74, 12 through 16 says, "For God is my king from of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. You divided the sea by your strength. You broke the heads of the sea serpents in the water." So the psalmist here saying, God is my king from of old. All right, we're looking. Job was one of the oldest books of the Bible, and he said the Behemoth, was one of the first ways of God. And that's what it's talking about here. God is the king even from the beginning, even from the olden times. And I love what it says. God was working salvation in the midst of the earth. Even in the olden times, the age of the dragons, the Lord of the Rings age, as you could call it, God was working salvation for his people. And you see in 13, he's the one that divided the sea. He split the sea up by his strength. God did it, and then he broke the heads of the sea serpents in the water. Now, these were, to me, I believe these were dragons in the water. These were more creatures. This wasn't the Leviathan. The Leviathan was something different, but there were other sea serpents. And again, it's what a dragon would have been. Satan is later called the fiery red dragon, or the fiery red serpent, because, it's showing how terrible they are. We see in these scriptures. But look at this. Look at this very next verse. This really caught my interest. You broke the heads of Leviathan in pieces and gave him as food to the people inhabiting the wilderness. He broke the head of the Leviathan in pieces. The Leviathan was a multi-headed dragon. You ever heard stuff like that? Greek mythology, you got the Hydra. That's what Hercules supposedly killed him in a trial. I think he had like 9 heads. You cut a head off, another one grows back. But anyways, it come from the Leviathan. Many video games. I love Final Fantasy. The Leviathan is a water creature in it. I don't think it had multiple heads, but there are creatures in that game that have multiple heads. But the Leviathan's been passed down throughout generations. It was a real creature, and then it got passed on as myth. But it's not a myth. This was real. But God, he was working salvation in this olden times. He crushed the Leviathan's heads, broke them, and then he fed the people in the wilderness. He was feeding the people during the olden times with this. And only God could do it, because none of the people could. That's why we don't see the old Leviathan anymore. And then we see, you broke open the fountain and the flood. You dried up mighty rivers. The day is yours. The night also is yours. You have prepared the light and the sun. And then he keeps going, talking about what God has done. But you broke open the fountain and the flood. You remember what happened? That's kind of what we're seeing. We're seeing what happened to these creatures. He said you had salvation during the old times, been the times before the flood. And he says you divided the sea by your strength. You broke the heads of the sea serpents. You broke the head of the Leviathan. Then he says, and you broke open the fountains in Genesis. It talks about that. The fountains rose from the bottom out of the ground, and then the flood came, and then he dried up the waters, and then he shows how the day is yours, the night is yours, everything belongs to God. And even when you go back and look at them creatures, again, many died during the flood, or God killed them before the flood. They all point to him and how amazing and awesome he is. Because if he could create that thing, something so powerful, and we see amazing things all the time too. Imagine an elephant and the power in that elephant. And I know a whole bunch of humans can take an elephant down, but if you're around one, there's a lot of power there. Being around a tiger or anything, you can just see God's creation. When you get out there and you see a hurricane or a thunderstorm, you're seeing God's creation. But I just really like that, because I've actually heard people say, the dinosaurs are just things, you know, Satan put out here to mess Christians up, but it ain't true. They were real. God took a bunch of them out. The flood took a bunch of them out. Then humans, when they weren't getting as big, humans were able to start taking some out. You see that all throughout throughout history. And then slowly over time, a lot of this stuff has become myth. And today, you know, I think of Godzilla and Kong. You know, you got Ghidorah. He's the three-headed dragon that came straight from the Leviathan. So people are still copying what God truly made, but it's really cool. When I see that stuff, I'm always remember, man, God is cool. You know, you can watch King Kong and Godzilla, and they may not have looked just like that. I don't know if there's a huge Kong like that, a huge gorilla like that, but I know there was something like a Leviathan. I know there was something like a Godzilla, and I know one thing: God can smoke them. He can't stop them. God is bigger than everything else, and that's why I've put my faith in him. And I encourage all of you to do it well, because just like it said right here, for God is my king from old, he's my king from old too, and he was working salvation in the midst of the earth back then, and he's still doing it today, because he sent Jesus to save all of us and forgive us of our sin. And Jesus has actually, he's took us out of the clutch of Satan, who's also called the fiery red dragon serpent. You can get in the scriptures and it talks about he's multi-headed too. The Leviathan of old was a picture of him coming as well. It's amazing when you get in the Old Testament, everything's a picture of what's going to come. And God broke the heads of the Leviathan and fed it to the people. Well, guess what? His son, through Jesus, God's done it again. He has broke the head of Satan. Jesus' foot crushed his head. And no matter what he brings up, we're victorious in the end. As always, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this one. This was kind of neat to me, and I hope you all have a blessed one.